Okay. So welcome to another Imbibe series session. I'm Denise Silverman, the Executive Director at the Wine and Food Foundation. And today we are tasting some wines from Austria. So before I introduce our hosts and get started into today's wines, wanted to talk about a few things happening at the foundation. I am so excited that we launched registration today for Toast of Texas, our first premier event of 2021. And we are just super excited. We launched registration on a staggered schedule. So today it was launched to our Epicurean members. In a couple of days, we'll launch to connoisseurs and then aficionados, and then we'll open it to non-members. We've already had a great day of registration today, so I'm very excited. It's going to be a great event. It's at Stonehouse Villa in Driftwood. Beautiful venue. If you've been there before, it's been completely renovated since they finished at the end of 2019, just in time for the pandemic. So most people haven't seen the renovation yet. So it's going to be great. It's sponsored by HEB. We have some great Texas wineries participating. We'll have some barbecue, some charcuterie. It'll be a great time. Sunday, June 13th from 2 to 4:30. So hope to see you all there. Our Imbibe classes, we are starting to kind of pare back from weekly to like 3 times a month. Now that we are, we went weekly because we weren't able to do much else. And now we're getting into the throes of more in-person Imbibe classes. Toast of Texas is coming up. And then of course we have the auction after that. So a lot going on in event world, which is so exciting. So just stay tuned to the website and our email blast to see what the Imbibe schedule has coming up. And speaking of that, we have next week, we will not have a class. The week after that, Wednesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. We are doing a Cinco de Mayo class, and some wines have been chosen that pair well with Tex-Mex. So we're going to ask everyone to, go out and get whatever Tex-Mex that they enjoy, and we'll have some fun with some wines that pair well with Tex-Mex. We've got someone else entering. So stay tuned. Actually, the registration has launched for that, and I think the wines will be posted tomorrow. And then the next one after that we booked kind of well in advance because someone's traveling into town is Tuesday, June 1st. It's a Tuesday, so keep that in mind, with Booker Wines. And you guys are the only ones who know this. Registration is open, but we haven't done any marketing around it yet. I'm sure we'll start within the next day or so. That will be in person. It will be at a great little venue on North Loop called The Commune. And I think it's going to be a flight of about 4 wines. He hasn't chosen them yet, but I'm sure they'll be fabulous. This will be limited registration, so keep your eye out for that. Okay, I think that's it. I think, let me just see, we've got lots of our loyal members here this evening, so thank you all for joining us. And then some members of our board, we've got Moxie and Pat. So thank you guys for joining us. And also, I think maybe just there's I also want to say thank you to Cynthia. I think she may be the only one. We had our first in-person Imbibe class last week at Treaty Oak Distillery, and it was just, we were all just grinning ear to ear the whole time, just having the opportunity to be together and in person, and it was just a really special evening. So more of that to come. Stay tuned. Before we start, don't forget, we've started the last sip, which if you haven't seen that yet, at the end of class, the last sip is just kind of, if you have something you'd like to share, that something new that you took away from this class, that, maybe something you learned from Scott and Austin, something about the region, something about the wines, some silly anecdote about Austin's cat or something like that, that you want to share. It can be funny, it can be silly, it can be nerdy, whatever you want, but it's a great way for us to kind of get to know each other a little bit. So with that, let's get to tonight's tasting. Austin and Scott, take it away. We'd love to hear a little bit about who you guys are. Tell us about High Street Wine, and then let's get into some Austrian wines.
Yeah, wow, thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate it. It's good to see everyone through a computer screen. Really appreciate you being here. My name is Scott Oda. I'm the general manager and beverage director for High Street Wine Company. We're a little neighborhood wine shop located within the Pearl. We normally like to do in-person wine classes, but obviously been doing a bit more of the online thing recently. I guess I've been in the food and wine business now for 16 plus years, a certified sommelier hire for 10 years. At some point, I will go toward my master's, but I need to stop opening wine bars first. That's me. I certainly want to introduce also one of our beverage leaders as well, with a really cute cat and edgy. That is Austin Tabbone. And I'll let him talk about himself as well before we dive in.
I think my cat's reputation is exceeding me already. I think that Neji's already becoming famous, and I'm a little jealous of this actually. So I'm Austin Tabbone. I'm one of the beverage leaders and assistant managers at High Street. And so I have been in wine for the majority of my restaurant career. I kind of jumped in even when I was underage to start drinking and immediately started learning. So I've been doing this for about 10 years now as well. And it's been a really wild ride, and I've managed to find myself as the assistant buyer at High Street, and I get to come do these really cool things like talk about places like Austria, which I was really hyped about when I got invited to this, since I've been there and it's a really cool place and it's really fun to talk about these wines. But with that said, I'd rather go ahead and jump into this. There's not much that you need to know about me. Let's drink some wine.
All right, can everyone see my screen share? Got some thumbs up, some shaking heads. All right, fantastic. So for those of you who have taken a wine class with me, you know I can really get to talking. I know Austin certainly knows that. I get really into this, and I sometimes kind of start getting going, and I get really excited. The best way for y'all to get questions in, because I really want this to be as interactive as possible, just hit us up in the chat box. It's so much easier for us to be able to see it, because unfortunately I don't have a gallery view. I can't see everybody. So as I go through this, it's kind of a lot of information, especially I know for myself personally, I'm much more trained, like let's say with French wines, or even more well-versed in California wines. This might be a brand new country for some of you, but it's a wonderful country with a rich history, and we're going to try to make this as easy as possible. So getting right in, I like to make this announcement before every single wine class that we do. This is a judgment-free zone. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different levels of expertise. This is a safe place. We want to encourage curiosity, discussion. I love opinions. I love hearing tasting descriptors, all that type of stuff. So we encourage you to ask questions. And make comments. So please put that in the chat box, and we'll try to get them into a timely manner. Additionally, too, I like bringing this up because I'm just so happy for everything that they've Manny and everyone has done down there. In lieu of any type of payment or tips or anything like that, we wanted as instructors, please consider a donation to these wonderful folks at the Austin Shift Meal. This is an organization that has been helping other hospitality employees who are furloughed and have had issues coming out of certainly out of COVID before they transition back into jobs. And so if you have a moment, please take a moment to look at what this organization is doing and consider a donation as well. All right, just make sure that everyone has a tasting order. The first three are white wines, so we thought it'd be a little bit better to showcase one more than red. Riesling second. Give me, yes? Hello? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I think coming back in, you're glitching pretty hard for a little bit.
Okay. I am in an apartment complex, so I'll do my best to stay on course. If I need to repeat something, please let me know. Gemmensersatz, which is mixed set field blend, then Zweigelt, and then Blau Frankish. So I can get to talking really just myself. So please don't wait for the end of it to start your to drinking. Please continue or like ask or start your drinking, get your descriptors together. And if you have questions, you can have those ready for you. Okay. First, a little bit of history. I love history, especially when it comes to wine. It really starts for Austria about 700 before the Common Era, when Celts and a lot of other tribes were there planting grapevines. These are the first ones that actually settle into settlements. And so they are kind of credited with really starting mainstream agriculture within Austria for their wine. Fast forwarding this a lot more, and it's really the Romans, just like a lot of other countries in Europe, that were really responsible for taking the viticulture to a whole nother level. And it was, and if you look at all the old ancient wine regions within Europe, it's like whether it be the Loire Valley, whether it be the Rhone Valley, whether it be Bordeaux, or whether it be Austria, there's always some major river that's associated with it. And for here in Austria, it is the Danube. It was selected in around the town of Vienna because it was a wonderful trading outlet and you had access all the way laterally across Europe. And so this became a major place in the world of wine, even in the early stages of its of a nation. Around 488, fast forwarding a little bit more, Roman Empire does fall and it does relinquish its sovereignty to it. So that's actually started becoming an area and territory of its own. And just like other countries within Europe or other major wine growing regions in Europe, it is monastic orders. It really develops the vine and brings the idea of terroir. The same monastic orders, Benedictines, Cistercians, you would also throw in the Bavarian monks. These were all people that were really starting to understand what grows well and how can we grow it better. Fast forwarding even further, that building that you see in the background, that is the Institute of the Kloster Neuburg. So just like UC Davis is to California, just like Adelaide School is to Australia, Kloster Neuburg is to Austria. A lot of wonderful grapevine developments have happened there. A lot of our modern day trellising systems that are now in almost every major wine region was developed here. A lot of crossings, a lot of research done into plant development was all done here. And they have one of the most rich histories and nurseries for any winemaking school in the world. Continuing further a little bit more, 1907, you actually saw the first attempt at codified wine law. So again, that even predates Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is kind of considered to be the first appellation system, but it wasn't necessarily finalized until quite a bit later. And there's a reason why we're showing these screw caps. And that is the diethylene glycol scandal. So just like the rest of Europe, everything was really paused by all the world wars. And then as things were coming out of it, more and more people were starting to drink wine, but it was far less codified. The lines were blurred and people were kind of adding things and doing things and manipulating their wines in a way that came across as maybe just a little bit unethical. And one of those things was diethylene glycol. And this actually was caught because a winemaker tried to write this off on his tax return about as an expense for agriculture to try to get some type of subsidy for it, finding out later that if you do it, you enter it in the wrong amounts, it's actually poisonous. And so what actually sparked was this huge backlash against a lot of the wines of Austria. And Austria went from being one of the most prominent wine producing countries in Europe, exports fell more than 80%. And then the Austrian government, born out of this conflict, was like, okay, we got to tighten some things up. And then with them joining the EU, they started really clarifying what it is their wine law is. And it became one of the most stringent wine laws in all of Europe, where everything is codified, everything is tasted, everything is cataloged. And so they're actually now one of the gold standards for wine law, and we'll go over that a little bit later. But 2000 was finally finalized and codified in line with 2002 being them on the map. We've all heard of the Judgment of Paris tasting in '76 for United States wines. Austria had the 2002 tasting, and this was a tasting that was organized by hello? Okay. Sorry, I got a little message that my message might have interrupted. If I need to repeat, I certainly can. But the 2002 London tasting was very similar to the Judgment of Paris. It was organized by Master of Wine Tim Aiken and several other wonderfully esteemed tasters. Some of the likes include Jancis Robinson as well, a lot of the editors of Decanter magazine, and they were trying to find out what are some of the best, most age-worthy white wines. So they were taking things like Kistler, they were taking Rouleau and Latour, they were taking Byron, like some like pretty well-known of these ageable white wines, and putting them against some of the best of Austrians. And Austria ended up taking the top 3 spots. So very similar to the way that the United States did in their tastings, Austria did as well. Emmerich Knoll's Smaragd actually took the top spot and like wiped the floor with everything from Burgundy. It was pretty amazing, and that was kind of the landing spot for Austria, and that is then now since taken off ever since. What I think has really helped it along is it is incredibly food friendly, and so a lot of sommeliers really kind of tend to gravitate toward it. In addition to, you know, they're a little bit undervalued in terms of the bottle and quality that you're getting for the glass. Like I was looking at a lot of the retail prices from Austin Wine Merchant. It's like, wow, to get the quality for this price is pretty unheard of coming from Europe. And as of right now, they're also still tariff free. So again, there's quite a bit of value here. In terms of production, they're not that big. We think that 2.75 million hectares is quite a lot, or hectoliters is quite in terms of production, but it's less than 1% of what we're producing in terms of volume of production in Europe and France. 90% of the wine is Qualitätswein and Products-wine. So to kind of put that into context, it's like the appellation, let's say, of like Alsace or Bordeaux. There's a very specific amount that's there, like that is considered at the top crew of quality. 90% of what they produce is at the appellated level. So there is quite a big push, not only just for tradition, but also for higher standards of quality. White grapes do reign supreme. More than 2/3 of plantings are white grapes. As we'll get into a little bit more details on the continental climate that is Austria, you'll see why maybe white makes a little bit more sense over there, with for us being quite an issue. There are 16 DACs, District Achilles Controladas, or appellations, just like DOCG or AOPs, but there's only 16 to know. So for us studying sommeliers, it makes it quite easier. But there is a lot more push to codifying within Austria. And so to turn it over to geography, climate, and soils, I'll pass it off to Austin.
Thank you very much. And it's always so cool to kind of go through the history again with you, Scott. And it's always really exciting to see kind of where the country went and everything that they've come through, because it's something that we kick around at High Street often is the whys, right? It's not just the what and what you're receiving, but why is it happening that way? And I think there's a combination of history and geography that controls why wines end up the way that they are. And I think Austria actually has a pretty simple geography if you really look at it. You look at the country and it's pretty big, but in reality, it's really just kind of like a stingray. You can cut this tail off and you've gotten rid of most of the parts of Austria that you don't really need and that you don't want. This far western range is all Alp mountain ranges. You have the majority of it being taken up by the central range, but then you have the northern and southern calcareous on the respective sides. So then you'll move over into the eastern part of Austria, where everything is kind of just split up into a north and south. So you can almost just look at it like California and have your northern Austria and your southern Austria, or your Mendocino versus your Santa Barbara, with kind of your Napa and Sonoma being in the middle, being your Burgenland. And so essentially with Austria, you have mountain ranges that are controlling the majority of everything, blocking any weather coming off of the Mediterranean in the west towards Italy, Greece, Croatia. In the east, though, you have the Pannonian Plain and the Danubian Plains, which is all flatlands and real little rolling hills. So I know the next slide is going to be a little bit more of a topographic map. So let's go and move over to that one so that we can look at the mountains a little bit more. So looking at this map, you can see that almost everything in Austria is mountain ranges. And so what this does is it creates a climate that's relatively similar in Germany, where you have these higher elevations, you get extra sun exposure, but you get very cool winds that influence the grapes. This is why you see so much more white wine coming out of Austria than red wine. You have very little areas that are able to truly get to the phenolic ripeness that you need, which is really that kind of southern area where you're getting down closer to Hungary and such. So moving on to the next slide. So as we were discussing, now that we've kind of looked through it, you've got the mountains dominating more than 2/3 of Austria's landscape. And so what you really get because of this is a lot of hand harvesting, lots of emphasis on quality, which is one of those things that really makes the fact that they're able to provide such high quality wines at a good price such a remarkable feat. However, you see a majority of their bulk production coming out of those flatlands. So the Danube is the second largest river and defines one of Austria's main wine growing regions, which is the Wachau, which you saw kind of in that northern corner. It starts in the Black Forest in Germany and goes all the way down to the Black Sea. So it's really a huge river, and it's a very key component to Austria's geography and to their soil structures. So looking at Austria in terms of weather, you have warming winds coming up off the southern coast through Slovenia and Croatia off of the Mediterranean. You have warming climates coming out of the eastern, more flatlands coming off of Hungary. But you have cooling climates coming from the south, and all of the rain is over to the west being blocked by all of those mountain ranges that we kind of looked at. And what happens is you have a very small amount of the rain kind of funneled through this top little red line that you see going along, that's going through that southern part of Germany, and it hits your first major wine region, which would be right under that second in the Vienna, and that's where you're going to kind of start to see the Wachau, which is going to be one of the most influential. Go ahead and move on to, here we are, soils. So anywhere you have rivers and mountains, you tend to have kind of a variety of soils. And so you basically had the Adriatic and the Eurasian plate collision. And Scott loves to talk about plate collisions. But it's always very fascinating, because what happens is you basically have the Adriatic Mountains in the west, and you have the Eurasian plate to the east. And the Adriatic Mountains basically the Adriatic plate slides over the Eurasian plate going up, creating these mountain ranges, which really defines your soils. It creates erosion, but it also creates soil diversity. And so you'll see three of the major soil types that you find throughout Austria. You've got gneiss, which is over in the west, or to the left. You have a mix of sandstone, which you kind of find more in the flatlands as deposits, whereas the gneiss is kind of more in the Wachau and in the terraced mountain areas of viticulture. And then in the far right, you see a type of schist, which is going to be where you grow most of your reds, kind of in that south, near Lake Niederlesse, which kind of helps with a little bit of water retention, since there's a little bit more of a humid climate down there. So we're going to talk about wine law a little bit, which is something that Scott loves to talk about. And then we'll really nice to get into the wines and the grapes of the region.
I'm such a nerd. Yes, I do love tectonic plate subduction. It's something that makes me smile. Wine laws. So here we go. So there are 3 levels of quality that you do find. We're going to spend most of our time talking about qualitative wine, because that's 90% of production. Land wine and vine really are a little bit over 6.5, coming up on 7% of the production. Not a whole lot. These are a lot of just regional differences. You'll tend to see them get split by either Österreich vine or just vine. Österreich, this being now 100% from Austria, and just vine being wine. It's kind of like the way that sometimes we'll have producers here in Texas bring grapes in from somewhere else. If we were like Austria, we would just say that it's just table wine. Land vine, so there are must be from approved grape varieties of Austrian origin. There are about 43-ish grapes that they are allowed to produce wine from. So it's not going to be just anything random that's thrown in there. It has to be approved, and it must be from 3 general areas, Vineland, Stierland, and Bergland. We didn't highlight those on the regions because those are the areas that do not fall within appellation areas. They're kind of more of your just like, those Pannonian plain areas where I can just mow it down with a tractor, or they're just like so mountainous they don't really produce a whole lot of wine, and there's not really a way to regulate or control it, so they just call it land vine. We're looking at the top of the pyramid, and every single one of the bottles that you had one of those little caps on it, and that really signifies that we're talking about King of the Castle. They are from a single wine growing region. So one of those particular areas that were aforementioned, like Wachau, like Kamtal, like Kremstal, any of the ones that are here in this tasting. It must be made from one of 40 approved grape varieties. So every single one is categorized to be made within those certain areas. They must show typicity. So this is another thing that I love so much about the Austrian wine, because there's so many wines out there. It's like I pull something from the shelf and it might taste completely different than what I might have expected. The New World kind of is in that like phase right now. If I buy a Pinot Noir, it might taste completely different than what I'm expecting. Austria's everything is done via taste panel, and it must be typical. So if you're looking for more consistency, Austria is a fantastic place to go to. The process is very strictly controlled. Everything is registered with the government. They have their own numbering system. Everything is cataloged and processed. They do not want another diethylene glycol scandal. You'll be able to recognize it as a wine of quality because it's capped with the Austrian flag. And then there are 4 subcategories, and this is where it gets just a little bit more confusing, but we are here to make it easier. So my meme game is going strong. So cabinet level wines, this is essentially its own style of wine where it separates itself from the VDPs or the ripeness systems, the Auslese systems that you do see within Germany. It does signal something that is ever so slightly off dry. Then you have the DAC wines, which are then split into 2 other subcategories, classic and reserve, one being more of just your general area, and then reserve being for more richer, more robust styles of wine. Prodicats, then you have your same levels that you have within Germany, except you adding 2 others that you don't see, or it's called something else. We have Strohwein and Schiefelwein, and these are essentially like straw or dried out, dehydrated grapes. Think of like Passamento in Italy, but they're very, very sweet. Then you have the Austrian sect wines, and those all mirror very similarly to the those of Champagne, but you have sect, classic, reserve, and gross reserve, essentially being your basic, your upper tier, your higher quality, and then your essentially your Grand Cru. Now it looks like a lot, but we're here to make it easier. So Cabernet, it's a little off dry. You're only going to be spending a little bit of money because they don't have to wait for ripeness to get there. DAC wines, classic, these are more like your very fresh examples to it. If you're looking for reserve wines, these are longer hang time. They typically see barrel. They might have botrytis in them as well. And for those who are unfamiliar with botrytis, it is the bacteria that grows that actually makes a lot of these wines smell like saffron and ginger. It adds that extra complexity. The only problem is if you don't manage your botrytis correctly, it quickly becomes gray rot and you start to lose yields. So it's a very risky game for you to play. So because of the oak, because of the botrytis, because of the later ripeness, you're going to be spending just a little bit more money. Predicate's fine. Again, sweeter wines is your Spätlese, Auslese. Because you're looking at longer hang times, you are and reduced yield, higher sugar, you are now going to be spending even that much more money. And then, God forbid, you go into the beer and Auslese, Eiswein, Strohwein, Trockelbeer and Auslese wine, you're going to be spending upwards of $3 because these are wines that your yields are drastically low, and you're not guaranteed to make these wines every single year. These are some of the most expensive wines that they make upon their market, and the reason why is because there's just not a lot of it. And so there's my other meme for it, Arnold making it easy. All right, I'm going to pass this back to Austin talking about major white grapes. I'll talk about major red grapes, and then we're going to drink through these wines.
So the white grapes of Austria are kind of a huge deal, right? They account for 2/3 of the country's production. So they're really worth kind of taking a minute to talk about. And what I love about them is that they're so straightforward and so simple. So the first one is Gruner Veltliner, and this accounts for the majority of the production in Austria. They produce this on all levels, from simple table wines all the way up to incredibly premium quality wines. And one of my favorite quotes that I ever heard about Gruner Veltliner is, sometimes it's Mozart, but sometimes it's Arnold. And like, it can be either. It can be this lean, pretty, really elegant thing, but sometimes it can also be really rich and brooding and round. And both expressions are incredibly beautiful and have different times. I would love to take down a 1 liter of Gruner Veltliner by the patio, as long as it's Mozart, but I don't want to take down an Arnold Gruner on the patio. And with that said, you can really just track those down by looking at alcohol levels. With Gruner Veltliner, the majority of its production is really done in that northern area in either the Wachau or in Kemptthal-Krimstal. And in those regions, they do a pretty good job of letting you know if the wine is going to be dry or regulating that it's going to be dry. So look for something around 12.5% if you want a Mozart. Look for over 13.5% alcohol if you want an Arnold. And both will be a really good time. Riesling is the other major grape. And if you go to Austria and you kind of look at most of their plantings, they like to plant the Riesling down a little bit closer to their rivers where it's a little warmer. And then they plant the Gruner a little higher up where you get a little bit more sun exposure and a little bit cooler ripening, since Gruner is a little bit easier to ripen than Riesling with its late budding. But early ripening, you're kind of doing this sprint with Riesling to try to get it to ripen within this window, whereas Gruner, you can kind of take your time a little bit to get full development. They do some other grapes in Austria, but not as much. You've got Velschriesling, Weissburgunder, Müller-Thurgau, so a little bit more of your German grapes. You've got Rotgipfel and Muscateller, which are a little bit more for blending and dessert wines, kind of down in Burgenland. They handle botrytis a little better than Gruner and Riesling, but you don't see these wines as much. And most of the time you see them acting as blending grapes and things like Gemischtersatz, which is a mixed bag of wines, which you're gonna get to taste here pretty soon. Just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and jump over into the red grapes, Scott. Let's talk about Blaufränkisch and Zweigelt a little.
All right. So before I do that, just a little, I have the slide up here just so it's a little bit easier for y'all. If y'all are not familiar with things like Gruner Veltliner, I like it's like the margarita to me of wine. It kind of smells like agave, lemon, lime, and salt. And so I love it. One thing that it reminds me very similarly is Pinot Grigio. And the application is very similar. So in terms of veggies, avocados, ceviches, I make that stuff all the time. We added Taco Bell because Austin, I have a guilty pleasure for Taco Bell. Gruner Veltliner and a Mexican pizza is absolutely phenomenal together.
It really is.
And then same
A
thing.
personal favorite of mine.
Rieslings, if you're also fans of Chenin Blanc, for me Riesling is like that. I love that these are to me like a good bridge to like an Australian, like Clare Valley as well. They have a lot of similarities to me in terms of the way that they're grown. Riesling can go with just about anything, dry or sweet, it doesn't matter, but usually the spice or the sweeter you get, usually the spicier, more chili oil, more peppers I can put in my food. And that's kind of a simple reminder too. If you see words like Spätlese, Auslese, so they're usually going to indicate a little bit more.
Hey, Scott, you're muted.
Oh, there we go. I'm just like talking and I'm just not even looking. There we go. All right. Okay. So the major red grapes here, there's always at least one technological glitch with these. Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch are really kind of the two to know. I would also throw in Saint Laurent as well. But Zweigelt is a crossing between Blaufränkisch and Saint Laurent. Saint Laurent to me is known for being very bright, very fruity. Blaufränkisch to me is known for being a little more spicy, a little bit richer and darker. It's something that I use as like a lateral for Syrah when it's made really, really well. If it is at higher elevation done in a Mozart style, it could be very similar to like Pinot. So Blaufränkisch, I think, is going to be one of those next great grapes for the world of wine. Zweigelt is the most planted. Blaufränkisch, you're starting to figure out where the best places to grow it are, and it's pretty amazing. I'm really excited for y'all to be drinking this more each year. Other ones, Blau Portugieser, it is in reference to, they do think this has Portuguese origins, but it tastes very much like a Touriga, which is one of the major grapes of Austria, and so they named it as such. And then Blau Burgunder essentially is, it does come from the Pinot family as well, hence the Burgunder. In terms of taste, Zweigelt to me, like I love the fresh versions or the classic versions of Zweigelt, which is why we wanted to show a classic as opposed to reserve. If I chill this wine down, it reminds me a lot of Beaujolais. And it's like, I love Beaujolais, but crazy enough is I can't really afford that much Beaujolais anymore. Beaujolais is like $40 a bottle now. Thankfully, Zweigelt's like under 20, which reminds me of Beaujolais prices. So if I put a nice little chill on it, like this thing has the exact same type of application to me. Like tacos, barbecue, tomatoes, Cajun, Mediterranean spices are all things that I love because it has this bright red fruit flavor, but it also has a little bit of that violets, just a little bit of herbaceousness to it as well, which makes it to be a really fun drinking wine for the warm climate of Texas. Blaufränkisch, this is to me, again, this is where I'm using and stealing Austin's metaphor between Mozart and Arnold. There are some Blaufränkisches, let's say maybe like a Marcus Altenburger or Moritz that is much more of like a Pinot style. And then you might have something like an Einrich, which is a bit more Syrah-like and which is more Arnold. So I think depending on the one that you get, again, extremely versatile. I look at Syrah and Pinot wines that I put on the table all the time. My favorite pairing though is just this very simple burger. A burger and Blaufränkisch work. Austria, they do a lot of game meats out there. Things like venison, things like lamb, things like squab. Those are all wonderful, wonderful pairings from Austria. And I think the thing that makes these wines just a little bit different is maybe something like Pinot is a very pure red fruit, or Syrah maybe a bit pure black fruit. I love that Blaufränkisch kind of has this brambly, like really dark berry component to it. It's kind of got a little bit of each shade to me that I find very unique, and at the same time still very versatile of what's on the table. So Denise, I told you I use Kristen Wiig's Wine Time as well. So here we go, getting into some of the wines. Before we jump into this, does anyone have any questions? I know that was a lot of information to kind of get down all at once.
There aren't any questions in the chat, but I'll ask one, which is,
okay.
I'd love to know, I mean, since they're more well known for white than red, I assume, do they have much rosé production? Is there, I mean, do they do much rosé, since I guess there's not as much red, then maybe not as much rosé as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So rosé, they're doing a little bit. They're starting to get more into it, but that's again a very new thing for them. They really focus heavily on whites. There's not many countries really, I say, other than Germany, that would say really put a big, strong focus on white wine. But I'm glad they do. It's what I think they do best. I'm excited to see more sparkling coming out of the areas. And then, I mean, who knows, with climate change, you'll probably start seeing a little bit more reds as well. But I think if they are going to put more money into it, I would say Blaufränkisch is going to be one of those next growing categories. But I think certainly with the popularity of rosé, you'll start seeing more as well.
Yeah, I definitely see the occasional Zweigelt rosé floating around. But it's generally not in huge quantities. It's not a thing that I find easily. When I'm looking to add wines, I can't just sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to add an Austrian rosé, but there is some. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably like 5-10% of production, if that. But there's a little bit of it floating around, and it's pretty freaking good. It's peppery and it's fresh, and if you see an Austrian rosé, go for it.
Austin, you want to walk into the white wines? Me through the
Yeah,
red?
if we don't have any other questions, let's jump into the whites a little bit. Although you've really got me craving a burger with some Blaufränkisch. That sounds so freaking delicious. So the first wine is Schloss Gabelsberg Gruner Veltliner. And I just freaking love this wine from all angles. This is definitely your Mozart style of Gruner. Gabelsberg does make a really yummy rosé. Always trying to get my hands on it. So anyway, Schloss Gabelsberg has a really, really exciting story. So they were originally planted in 1074 by the Zvedel Monastery. And then the first vineyards were actually planted in 1171. So they've had a hot minute with their terroir and to kind of spend some time with the lands that they've planted. It's now been taken over by Eva and Michael Moorsberger, but it's had the castle of Gabelsberg has had over 19 different families control it. So it's been kind of passed around, and it has a pretty rich history depending on what wars Austria was involved in and what other things have been going along. It's who was trying to take over the world at what time. But that said, they do have some of the oldest documented vineyards in history under their position, and that's the vineyards of Geisberg and Haugenstein. And these are both sites for Riesling. These are incredibly famous sites and have a very long, rich history that have been planted since 1074. So they've been going on for a long time and then replanted in 1740. You have volcanic and slate soils going along in this area, so you get a little bit more richness and a little bit more phenolic ripeness and development coming out here. And so something that I love to talk about with Gruner Veltliner is the fact that it has this gorgeous white pepper quality to it. It has these really beautiful kind of peachy lemon citrus things going on that remind me a lot of Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, but it has texture. It has a little bit of phenolic bitterness, and it has a little bit of minerality on the palate. When you give it this swish, it has a little bit of grit. And what's so unique about this wine with the combination of the white pepper and that texture is it makes it go very well with root vegetables, which is the bane of a sommelier's existence. The bitterness and things like asparagus, radishes, arugula, all of those peppery root-like vegetables are incredibly difficult to pair to because the pepper tones, rotundun, and the bitterness of them really cause artichokes. They cause a lot of issues when it comes to pairing. But when you throw in something like Gruner Veltliner that can kind of hang with those things and can mirror it in terms of pairings, it's a really great appetizer wine. It's fantastic for your spinach artichoke dip. It's fantastic for bacon wrapped Brussels sprouts. It's a really wonderful aperitif wine. However, if you so desire to chase after those Arnold styles, look for words like Schmarrog, look for alcohol percentages over 13.5%, and you're going to rock a pretty rich, developed wine on the dinner table, something pretty serious for things like your schnitzel and spatzel. Does anyone have any questions about wine number one? Comments, concerns, raving reviews? It is delightful, isn't it, Denise? So good.
Yeah, Austin, I'll say to your point too. It's like, we are very lucky in drinking a lot of Gruners. This example to me is so floral. It's so inviting. It's like, it's kind of like Terlana is to Pinot Grigio. This Gabelsberg is to Gruner Veltliner. It's so light and ethereal. It's clean. It's minerally. I feel tension there because it kind of has like, I can almost taste that and it comes across to me as like lemon lime Gatorade when I try really like dry extract, cool climate, brightly made wine. It has that there, but it's done in an extremely elegant way.
Well, and we've talked about this before.
Bucks, this thing smokes.
It's awesome for the price point. There's a reason this is everyone's house wine at work. Yeah. But one of those other things that we've talked about many times with Gruner is it has this French mirepoix quality to it. It's got this kind of celery, carrot, light veggie stock kind of feel to it. It's a little corny sometimes. And I just think that it's such a great option for those who maybe eat a little bit more vegetarian, or people who don't necessarily want such heavy dishes that normally call for the majority of the wines that we see on a store shelf. And something I love about Gobblesburg is actually with their classic and their tradition line, which is that entry level line. It's actually made by all of the enology students who are studying and learning at the winery. And it's overseen by Michael and Eva. They don't take on head winemaker for these wines. So there's an emphasis on education and moving forward with the next generations as well.
Awesome.
Let's drink some freaking Riesling. This wine is awesome. I love the topographic map over the insects and the kind of subtle nod to the biodynamics that Weingut Vesely is practicing. So they've been farming since 1679, but the winery kind of got revitalized in 2011 by Davis Vesely. And they're making pretty serious wines. Even though they haven't been at a long time, they have really kind of learned and utilized their neighbors like Brundelmeyer to kind of teach them how to make these really incredible wines. So this is a little bit more serious of a Riesling. This is going to be a single vineyard. You'll notice that on this picture, you see the word Ried. Ried will always mean single vineyard in Austria. And then right below it is Loiserberg. So Loiserberg is a little bit higher elevation. You have this nice and mica schist soils. So you have soils that radiate sunlight and reflect heat, which is key. This is kind of reminds us of Germany, but it also helps your Riesling ripen a little bit because Riesling's name of the game is always ripeness. And so with this wine, they're trying to get it to a level of ripeness to where it doesn't have to be dry, or I apologize, where it doesn't have to be sweet and will be a dry wine. And so this wine is able to achieve that thanks to its positioning and its great vineyard health, thanks to biodynamics, which if you haven't heard the word biodynamics before, this is actually a very Austrian thing. This was founded by Rudolf Steiner. He was Austrian, but technically in Hungary. It just depends on what part of history you're kind of looking at. But he initially put forward this process where you show concern for the vineyard's health and a balance of the ecosystem. And so they farm according to lunar schedules. They have very stringent vineyard practices where you don't put anything kind of bad into your vineyard, and everything is meant to be this kind of self-sustaining, harmonious practice. And with that, you get healthy, rich, delicious wines. This wine does have 20 months on the lees. So lees, we know, is going to be the spent yeast, which breaks down and the skins or the cellular structures integrate into the wine. So this wine should have a little bit more of a doughiness and a little bit more of a seriousness than a lot of your typical Rieslings, but still comes in super crisp, super refreshing, definitely a patio pounder, definitely awesome with your soups and with your salty little fried things, and can kind of veer into being that little lemon splash on top of some of your fish.
Yeah, one thing that I add to it as I'm drinking this wonderful wine, I try to think of when I'm drinking wines in terms of laterals. Like if someone likes this, what else are they gonna like? This to me is like one of those perfect midpoints between Germany and Australia. Mm-hmm. In terms of like it has like the elegance, finesse, minerality, what I expect of a lot of German ones, but it also has the energy and brightness of Australian without it being oversearingly dry. Like it has just a wonderful balance to it. And the mid palate, I think, and it's 20 months on the lees is pretty unusual for Riesling.
Yeah, that's a lot of lees.
But I think it's great because it gives a mid palate texture to it. And fish and chips with something like this, I think would be just phenomenal. And like it would make me super happy because it's something that's really bright, something that's very fun. Like you said, it's a squeeze of lemon over it. Like I just think it's lights out. I really enjoy this wine. It's showing a little more on that floral and slightly tropical and peach side as well. Austin, it kind of has those same peach rings that you'll find in like white Bordeaux. So I think that's another one of those like easy transitions. If you like that, you will also like this. The one cool thing about this is again half your price of maybe some of those other wines that we had aforementioned. But I think this is again another one of those steel wines.
To
Quick
answer
question. Do you know if the
question.
barrels are neutral, food or barrels? Yes, good question. So Moxie asked if the barrels are neutral and if food or barrique or other. I believe it is a neutral barrel and I think it is large format. I am 99% sure on that. There's a joke of saying like, well, only the devil oaks blank. I don't see them using any type of new oak on Riesling. Now, in terms of lees stirring, I don't know the regimen on the stirring of the lees.
I was
surprised.
They did not do lees stirring on it.
Yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if they try to stir that in, but again, I don't know 100%. That's
However,
a good question.
Something that I
Did you read it?
found, yeah, it's so no lees stirring, and it actually has 6.5 grams of residual sugar to it. So I think maybe if we're getting something that seems like maybe there's a touch of new oak on it, I think it might just be that like very subtle sprinkle of a little bit of RS. But definitely has tons of acidity to kind of back it up for sure.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I completely agree with Austin, yours and Moxie's comment as well. For me, it's like a little bit of functional residual sugar is like dosage. Like sometimes I just in my champagne, sometimes I just need a little sugar, just really to balance out the palate, not necessarily to be sweet. And so if I'm drinking this wine, I still call this a dry wine. It tastes dry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thankfully, they put a little sugar in there so it doesn't steer my teeth off. Next set.
Gemischtresatz. I want Gemischtresatz to be in everyone's home forever on. It's one of my absolute favorite wines, and I think it's such a wonderful wine if you're going to a house party. If you're going to someone else, I think this is a really great wine to take along with you. So Gemischtresatz is essentially a regulated field blend within the city of Vienna. It's incredibly historic. They've been doing this since pretty much the beginning of time for Austria, and they've just kind of been planting grapes within it. Bernard Ott has had these vineyards since 1889, and they're one of the biggest producers within the region, which is, again, an urban vineyard. All of these vines are just kind of like on people's patios throughout the city, which is really cool. So this is 4th generation and has a pretty healthy blend to boast within it. It's primarily Chardonnay, which is very common for Gemischtresatz, but it also has some of your more familiar things in it, like Pinot Blanc under the guise of Weissburgunder, as well as Gruner Veltliner. And the thing that I think is so interesting about Gemischtresatz is it must contain at least 3 grapes blended in, must be from the same vineyard, must be co-fermented, must be dry, must be at least 12.5% alcohol, must not display new oak. So this is where I think that it really makes for such a safe thing to take over to someone's house, is that no new oak. It makes it such a safe blind buy. And no one grape may exceed 50%. The 3rd grape must be at least 10%. So that's a lot of regulating to say these are true blends that are done in a dry style. And what I think is so beautiful about these wines when you take to people's houses is it has that richness and that familiarity of your Chardonnay drinker, but it's still a little lean. The Pinot Blanc, the Gruner Veltliner, jump in, the Velschriesling, give the wine a little bit of leanness and will also please your Pinot Grigio or your Sauvignon Blanc drinker. And so I think if you don't know what they like to drink, you don't know what's going to be served, this is a really beautiful, safe call that also has that like, wow, they know wine kind of factor. since it's also a little off the beaten path, and you don't have to worry about throwing a lot of money at something for your friends who may not be as wine drinkery as you are. But I think this is a really great wine and really translates what Gemeistersatz is, which is a mixed bag of wine.
Yeah, I mean, if I may add to this, so this has been one of my new favorite styles of wines. These blends I find have better meldings than a lot of other blends that I've had. I mean, maybe like the Alsace field blend comes close, but the precision on these wines is quite astounding to me.
I think that's the
Every
mandatory
Gemeistersatz that I've had.
co-fermentation.
I'm sorry?
I think that's the mandatory co-fermentation that's really helping do that. I think there's just a synchrony. We all talk about the crock pot effect. If you add something to a crock pot after it's been cooking, it never turns out as good as if you just started with everything in the beginning.
Yeah,
And I think it's kind of
absolutely.
similar.
Yeah, and it's funny because like you kind of feel it's like a really good like cocktail or like craft beer we're talking about. It's like I read the ingredients and it's like I see where that's there, but it's still just done and integrated so well. And there's this level of like concentration and dry extract that's in this wine that also is for me familiar with a lot of the wines like of Alsace. So like if someone likes Alsatian field blends and wants to try something new, this is another good step into a different direction. Yeah, this wine's awesome. It's got a lot of application to the table too. So again, like if I'm not sure what someone's cooking for dinner, bring a bottle like this over and it'll go well with just about everything. To your Mirepoix comment, one of the only positive things about the ice storm that hit Texas is my girlfriend is able to make a batch of homemade chicken soup. And we brought a bottle of Gemeistersatz with it, and it was one of the best pairings I've had in years. So just throwing that out there.
Sitting in my list for it, since it's lost more than half of its hectare plantings. It's gone down from 1,300 hectares down to 600 in the past 10 years. So please save the Gemeistersatz.
Yeah. I guess that's one of our new missions now.
Before you guys move on to the reds, can you maybe talk a little bit about, like, you touch on the food pairings, like, is there anything specific as you kind of go through the first three that you would or wouldn't pair with any of these?
Yeah, I'll let Austin answer first, and then I have certainly lots of feelings and opinions on this.
I mean, so with these first three wines, one of my favorite things about them is that I really think that they're beautifully versatile, and so they make for a pretty safe wine to throw down on the dinner table, with little fear of a truly bad pairing. Things like the Riesling and the Gruner, if you have that Mozart elegant 12.5% alcohol style, could very easily get overwhelmed by really rich meats. If you throw some lamb or a steak or something at it, you might overpower it just a little. However, if you go to Austria, it's kind of hilarious. They have all of these billboards of shoots of asparagus popping out of Gruner bottles, and they're super proud of that. So definitely asparagus and Gruner Veltliner is a really sought after and classic pairing. And I think Riesling and Schnitzel is also a pretty regionally classic pairing. They like to do Gemeistersatz with rich fish. So white fish of some sort is a really good complement for Gemeistersatz. However, I definitely think things like Riesling is a beautiful pairing for spicy, whereas I probably wouldn't go for spicy with the other two wines, since the pepper might kind of get amplified a little with your Gruner, with that bit of bitterness that's kind of around. Astringency and heat aren't always a good combo.
I agree with that. I have some crackers here that have a lot of pepper in them, and the Riesling was perfect.
Yeah, Riesling and spicy together makes hot and sour soup, and that makes me happy. So I always say that that's a really great way to go. If you have something really spicy, throw something with really high acidity at it, and you'll have a pretty good time.
Love it. How about shellfish?
Shellfish for sure. Depending on the type of shellfish that you're dealing with, if you're doing, let's say, a mussel boil, I might lean a little bit more Gemüsesalz to complement the butter that you would be doing with it. If you're going raw oysters, Gruner and Riesling all day long.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, for me, I think like it's classically veggies for me, and Gruner is so good. Your starter salad, I think, is perfect. I find that a lot of Gruner to me tastes like lemon radish, lemons and radishes. So if I have that combination, I think what goes well with just about any one of those things. Yeah, certainly seafood, fish tacos, all that fun stuff there. When I start getting into the Rieslings, I actually like going into lighter meats with things like that. Pork is something that I love putting together with Riesling. It's a little more of a delicate meat, but it's that salty, savory component. And Riesling to me is so energetic, sour, and bright that like it just makes it everything just kind of light up. I also like a lot of things like Asian food with stuff like Riesling as well, because it's very like soy and salt driven as well. So using that richness to get cut by all the acid is quite fun. And then with things like the Gemüse or Satz, when you're having these blends, they tend to be pretty aromatic and pretty floral. I actually love floral with piquant and spicy. So things like, let's say like curry, I think are wonderful with floral, different grape varieties and floral mixes. I think of like a vegetable curry, I think would be phenomenal with Gemüse Sats. I love Austin's thing. Like if I'm going maybe more raw seafood, go with something like Gruner Riesling. If I'm going more like cooked in like a rich broth or butter, something like that has more of that dry extract power, like the Gemüse Sats. But really the versatility on these first three wines is pretty astounding in terms of being able to bring it over to anyone's dinner table and have it go well with something. Let's see. I think the wines.
We dive into the reds. I know we're going a little over. I don't want to invade any.
Yeah, that's my fault. I told y'all I can get to talking.
All good. All good.
All right, here we go. So it's Weigelt. This is from Weingeschnieder. This is a little hard for me to find some information on it. It was very family of them. It's like I tell our staff here at High Street, it's like for our website and web store doesn't look very good. It's because I'm empathize with the folks of Schneider, but I believe they're on their third generation. It is now run by Gord, which is the grandson of the family. They are all looking at more loamy clay as well as weathered sand within this region. So Tabbone region is pretty close to the town of Vienna, just a little bit more north. Here, it's again very cool in its climate, so it's very soft and very easy. They do a mix of new as well as used barrique. They never get above 10% new oak, which I love. So it's meant to be very bright as well as very fresh. And again, I love putting just a little bit of a chill on a wine such as this because it has a little bit more of those Gamay-like qualities to me. It has that fruit forwardness of it, but it's also that food friendliness, that violet, that pepper is still very bright and very refreshing. There are those words organic and biodynamic again. They certainly do that as well. And I just think this is a really delicious, quaffable red.
It's a great spring summer red for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's really nice too whenever you're in places here like Texas where we like drinking red wines, but we want something that's just a little bit softer, a little bit easier. I love the tannins on this wine. The tannins are very delicate. They're very fine, and they're never going to be very obtrusive on the palate. And again, there are these wines I don't also have to really age for very long either. I can drink them within the first 5 years and be just really happy with that. I would pair with these wines very similar like I kind of would with a Gamay. Maybe like vegetables I think work very well with Zweigelt. Anything that is kind of pan roasted, just because just that little kiss of oak that's on this wine, I think goes really well Meyer chemistry you get from a frying pan. Lighter style meats, I think, work really well. Hot dogs and Beaujolais. I think hot dogs and Zweigelt will be absolutely knock out of the park as well. Again, nothing to me that just really stands out as being obtrusive in terms of food and wine pairing. Maybe that I think, like, for example, the Moritz is a bit more specific. But I hope y'all like this wine as well. And for time, I'll jump through the Moritz, the Blau Frankish. This is kind of a relatively new property, especially when we consider all the history that is there within Austria. This winemaker has certainly gotten a lot of attention, finding very specific sites and higher elevations within Burgenland for Blau Frankish. And you find everything from a Pinot style all the way to a Syrah style with his. This one is, we joke around, it's kind of the entry-level one, 10 to 50-year-old in terms of vine age. It is sourced from two separate vineyards within Burgenland. That is the Nechtmarkt and the Lutzmannsberg. No oak anywhere on this wine, no fining, no filtering. It is organic. And wines such as this, I do compare it to things like Syrah. It has that kind of pepper and violet quality to it. It's a little bit darker, a little richer. I love those kind of those herbaceous components to it. And I would have it again in that very similar vein that I would in the terms of a Syrah. It's got a little bit of funk to it, which I also really like. A little bit of that kind of dark rock smell. But I hope y'all liked the reds. A little bit more expensive, but again, if I'm trying to compare it to other things, let's say like Pinot Noir or to Syrah, that's still a heck of a lot cheaper than your average Syrah or Pinot for the quality I think you're getting in the glass. So that was our tasting. I certainly was hoping we get some feedback from y'all. If we had any favorites, if we had any food pairings we thought we'd really want to try, and could you certainly see yourself trying more Austrian wines?
Don't forget that last sip.
Yes, exactly. Perfect segue, Scott. I'd love to hear from y'all. This was definitely a very new region for me, and I really liked the way you went through it. And I do want to mention, for Scott's benefit, that we started with 6 wines, and I asked him if he could possibly pare it back to 4 or 5, because we try to listen to the feedback we get, and 6 wines is a lot to open in one night for some people. And so, and he was like, oh, it's so hard. So, and I'd love to hear, really quickly, because I want to hear from everyone, what was the 6th wine? What do we miss out on? Because I know you were passionate about it. And then I really want to hear from everyone else too.
I think I'm passionate about it just because I'm passionate. I think the wine's delicious. So the one that got axed was Heidi Schrock's Ferment. Ferment, certainly I think of as a bit more of a Hungarian grape variety. So that was the one that we kind of decided against. But being a huge fan of Heidi Schrock and what she's been doing, something that we thought would be a really fun thing to feature. It kind of is one of those transitioning wines too, because where she's from, certainly more known for a old school style of wine called Rooster Ausspruch, which is kind of like the Austrians' version of like Sauternes. These are botrytis driven white wines, but because less of the world is drinking these sweet dessert wines, making them into a really fun dry wine. So this kind of reminds me of like the great, still white Sauternes that you're starting to see in the market that are just labeled as white Bordeaux. But I wanted to showcase that one. So that one unfortunately got axed. But Austin Wine Merchant has it, and certainly High Street does too, because we love it and we love Heidi.
Yes. Well, I apologize, and
it's okay.
Obviously it's already 10 after 7, and we've barely gotten through the 5, but we can all add that to our purchase list. I'll do a quick start on the last sip, which is the Gruner was just everything for me, and I am a red wine drinker, so that's saying something. This is going to be in my refrigerator as a great summer wine, definitely with seafood. It has such a great balance of flavor. And the pepper I love. I'm a big pepper fan in wine. So this was great for me, and I just loved learning about the region. I just don't want to say any of them in public. I'll just politely point to them on the menu. So anyone else have any new takeaways from tonight?
I have a takeaway. Am I
Let's
on?
hear it, Jeff. Yeah.
So yes, we love the Riesling. We love all the wines. They're really good. We'll be drinking more of these. We got our food at Schultz's Garden, and they have a polka band on Wednesday nights with Lederhosen and all the get up and go and stuff. So I think I'm going to do that more often, pick up food to go, listen to a couple polka band, get some of these wines, and have some schnitzel at home as we go forward this summer. Wonderful.
That sounds amazing.
What's up, man?
Sounds awesome.
We're all jealous. That's perfect.
I only have the Riesling tonight because I try to limit myself to a bottle or a bottle and a half a day. But I always like the history that Scott brings in. That was really interesting. And just one more little bit of history that's has nothing to do with wine, but for you non-Texans, this is San Jacinto Day, which is probably the most important day in Texas history because that's when we won independence. And it's also the beginning or in the middle of Fiesta San Antonio always, which has been postponed this year to June. But if you've never been Fiesta in San Antonio, it's a really neat thing to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Battle of the Flowers.
Mm.
It's awesome. Thank you. I'm really glad. History is one of my favorite things in talking about wine. It gives me a tie back to another time.
Yeah.
And it also gives me context for everything, that this has been going on for far longer than me and will continue on well beyond me. So.
Who else? Anyone have anything else to share? Any big takeaways from today? Something you didn't know, or a bottle that you know you're going to be buying more of in the future? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, looks like we've got a little party going on down there with Shannon's group. So, so we'll say thank you so much to Scott and Austin. This was a really, really informative class. We learned so much. Yes, round of applause. Thanks for being with us. And High Street Wines, if you're in San Antonio, please go visit. It's such a great shop, and obviously you've got great people there to help you out. So thank you so much, Scott and Austin. We've all learned so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you all in the near future.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate the support.
Thank you for having us.
Foundation, and come give us a high five in San Antonio if you're around.
We loved it. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Good night.